Just over 3 weeks ago, NBC Nightly News in the US aired a segment covering the future of solar electric vehicles, and they highlighted the role of Aptera in that marketplace. It was a massive coup for Aptera, because, as per viewing data, NBC's Nightly News can reach 7 million viewers on a single night. So it's no surprise for that particular segment, Aptera, which to date has been really careful about who drives its prototypes, let reporter Steve Patterson take the Aptera Gamma prototype out on the road behind the wheel, with Aptera co-founder Chris Anthony in the passenger seat. And everything looked great until about 1 minute and 20 seconds into the video, at which point we see Aptera Gamma slow down dramatically on a hill, not once, but twice, followed by Chris Anthony telling Patterson, quote, "I think you're the first person to drive this up a hill." While Chris Anthony, I spoke with him in preparation for this video, recalls the exposure pretty positively overall, the reaction online was less uniformly good, and it reminded me of something I think we all too often forget. Not only is it hard to bring a new electric vehicle to market, but it's incredibly hard to do that as a startup, navigating the sea of crowdfunding, investor pitching, and eager media attention. So today, let's cover some of those issues. Before we get too far into this, and because I'll be talking about the tale of the big news company and the three-wheeled startup, let's put something on the table. I am currently a pre-reservation holder for Aptera. I put down my own money to hopefully buy one if and when it makes it into production. Personally, I like the company's attitude towards right to repair, and professionally, my interactions with the company have been great. It's been upfront about issues, challenges, and setbacks it's faced. But I've also disagreed with the company and its leadership in the past. I personally felt the transition to NACS, for example, doesn't directly help lower the price of EVs or indeed make EV charging more accessible. But as a potential customer, it is only fair I let you know my personal and professional stance on the company, since I'll be featuring the company a lot in this video. As for the video itself, I'm going to focus on the challenges facing startups looking to drum up interest for a new vehicle, usually in the form of customer deposits, investor dollars, and some sweet, sweet media attention, using Aptera's NBC coverage as a starting point. So let's start by looking at how a company gets the money it needs to get to the point where it actually has something it needs to promote publicly. When the founders of a company have an idea, they'll need to find funding to make it a reality. Often some chunk of that is their own equity. If they've got generational or independent wealth, that might keep them going for a fair while. But eventually they'll need external funding, usually from the form of a bunch of investors or a so-called angel investor. These folks will negotiate terms, the details of them don't really matter here, and that investment will help push the company forwards. For automotive startups, that usually means at least a concept design for looks and some basic engineering for basic specs. It might even mean a proof of concept to reach a point where you can prove that your idea fundamentally works. But what happens next does depend on the company. Some, like Rivian, spend years and years in so-called stealth mode. They use angel investors to engineer and refine a product long before revealing it basically fully formed. Other companies enter the PR game earlier, opening their order books or asking for crowdfunding well before any functional prototypes exist. Generally, the longer a company is stealth and the more angel investment it has, the more likely it is to exit stealth with a near-production status vehicle. But to get that kind of investment requires perfect timing for your product concept and a huge potential target market. The more niche a product, the less likely it is to receive that kind of angel investment, and the more likely it is to make its public debut and look for public funding earlier. And that, of course, involves successful PR. As any observer can tell you, in many countries, you can put anyone in political office if you have enough money, illegal or otherwise, and enough spin doctors to boot. In the world of automotive startups, you can pretty much do the same with enough clever advertising, and just like politics, automotive investors generally like something to show for their spending. They tend to abandon ship if prototypes and meaningful developments are scarce, unless, of course, you have a company CEO or press person who possesses a reality distortion field, in which case, if they're convincing enough, it really doesn't matter what the actual product is, as long as that hype train keeps chewing along. By their very nature, most startups don't have a lot of cash to spend, and thus the money they do spend on PR and advertising has to be carefully budgeted. That means ensuring that the right people gain access to a vehicle and that the right message is sent to a wider audience. Some startups, quite a few in fact, fail on the first hurdle. They'll either make outlandish promises they can't keep, or they lock down access to the vehicle out of fear that one reporter will spoil the brand's hard work forever. As a journalist, one of the biggest red flags to me when it comes to covering a startup is when a startup sends continual press releases about every single thing said company is doing, but won't let a journalist within 5 miles of any vehicle, prototype or concept. Some go even further, allowing select influencers to access their vehicle or product, but insisting that access comes with editorial control over what the finished message is. Usually there's money that exchanges hands in that kind of situation, and the finished coverage from such interactions are not often representative of what's really going on at the company. Worse still, people consuming the resulting media are often unaware of how that's been produced. It's basically an advertorial rather than a media report, where the editorial control is 100% retained by the reporter or the news outlet they work for. On the flip side of this, when a company gives journalists a much broader access to a vehicle, perhaps earlier than they should, there's a lot more risk to the company. But any journalist worth their training should ask some pretty basic questions of an automaker when reviewing or covering a new vehicle, be it pre-production or concept or in production. And for what it's worth, I personally usually include these 4 questions. First, is this a production intent vehicle or a prototype? Second, if this is a prototype or in development vehicle, what is going to change or what needs to be addressed before the vehicle is in fact production intent? Third, what challenges lie ahead for the company and the vehicle? And finally, right now, as I'm looking at the vehicle, what is currently broken / not working / in need of tweaking? This last question is super important because, as I often say, context is king, and it's frankly pretty disingenuous to represent a product you've been told is a prototype by implying that it's actually ready for market. That said, I've encountered some companies whose PR folks were either poorly trained on the vehicle, didn't care about it, or couldn't answer those 4 basic questions. Sometimes that situation exists because a company doesn't have the money to pay a proper automotive PR person who actually knows the market. Sometimes it's because the PR person was asked to do PR at a single event for a new company and didn't really know the client or their product. And sometimes, believe it or not, it's because the PR person isn't actually a PR person. I always make it clear when I am driving or riding in a prototype if there's something the company in question has told me is not quite right. but that requires the company to tell me as such. When I rode in the Aptera Alpha prototype 2+ years ago, I made it pretty darned clear that I was in a prototype and I shared the things that were working and the things that weren't. And every time I've personally interviewed someone at Aptera, it's been clear which prototype I was experiencing. I will come to the NBC segment in a moment, but I have some observations there that I think are worthwhile to note, plus some feedback from Chris Anthony on the timeline of it all. But back to startups and media first rides and drives. In 15+ years, I've driven prototype cars from mainstream automakers that weren't quite right, and the automaker has told me before I've even got behind the wheel that X or Y wasn't production intent or fully tweaked. Or more commonly, they would just say I'm driving a pre-production or a production intent, or sometimes even an engineering work vehicle. Conversely, though, I've driven in vehicles where the PR person or a company executive told me confidently that everything was perfect, when it wasn't. There was that time in 2013 when I drove a BYD E6 that was seriously not well, and, as you can see on a video from this channel, was kind of dangerous to drive.
We are now doing... Oh my...
I don't know if that's being recorded, but there's
20...
there's quite a loud pitched whine coming to my ears.
Oh my. I'm sorry, that's dangerous. I've seen G-Whizzes go up hills quicker than that. G-Whizzes with similarly charged batteries. I am...
There's a silence that says a lot here.
Then there was that time I took a prototype converted Range Rover. By the way, nothing to do with Land Rover Jaguar. It was converted by a small independent startup, and it had quad in-wheel motors. The vehicle, the CEO told me, was perfect, but then on the drive, I had motors fail multiple times. And then there was that time when Robert Llewellyn and I once drove from Park Lane in London to somewhere in North London, and we left the car stranded at the side of the road because it just stopped working. Sadly, I don't have clips from either of those last two experiences, but I think you get my drift. How a PR person answers tough questions, or how a company CEO deals with things going wrong, is the difference between a story where you go, "Oh, that's bad luck," versus, "Oh, this company is hiding things." In the 3 examples I've just quoted, I was given a huge range of excuses as to why things failed. I was blamed for driving a car too hard. I was told it's never ever happened before, only to then find out later on that it had happened to a colleague of mine a few weeks earlier. A good journalist, a good YouTuber, will ask the company involved to loop back when things go wrong with an explanation of why things didn't go according to plan. Often that does come in the form of a chat with an engineer responsible for the vehicle. We've even had post-test drive conflabs with engineers on location to give them feedback about our experiences. But thankfully, that's always good fun because you learn more about the vehicle and about how it's built. But don't think that mainstream automakers never have test drive issues either, because they do. More often than you might think. And most press launch events have an engineer on staff, just in case. Simply put, when a company owns the problem and is authentic about what's going on, things are much better for the company in question. And it doesn't matter if it's a startup bringing a solar electric vehicle to market or the world's leading electric automaker.
Oh my God. Well, maybe that was a little too hard.
Essentially, putting your hands up and going, yeah, that shouldn't have happened, is generally a good way of starting, followed by a detail of the steps you're going to take to make sure that what just happened doesn't happen again. If you take that clip of Tesla's Cybertruck window being shattered and then compare it with the Faraday Future launch event from 2018-ish, which Faraday Future ex post facto edited out of the live stream, but don't worry, we have the original.
Okay, it seems like it's a little bit lazy tonight, so maybe you would like to say a few words to the audience here?
This shows the two different ways a company can respond to things going badly. Which is, I guess, a good time to loop back to Aptera. In my call with Chris Anthony this week, I learned a few things that I think are worth sharing. First, Aptera appears 100% owner of this issue. As I understand it, Aptera's Gamma prototype had spent most of its time in Europe between its unveiling last summer at Fully Charged Live in San Diego and filming the session with NBC Nightly News. While it was in Europe, it didn't have a whole lot of downtime, and I understand it was there without a fully completed motor cooling system in place. Obviously, spring in Europe is cooler than summer in San Diego, where Aptera is based, and upon return, Aptera was given a chance at short notice to be on NBC. As I understand it, the company literally had a few days to get ready, and on the day of filming, there were multiple trips up and down that hill in question to give NBC lots of B-roll. Nothing new there. I mean, it's something we do when we have a press car, up and down to get the perfect shot. Steve Patterson's drive happened after the B-roll shoot had concluded, and by that time the weather and the car were pretty toasty. Chris Anthony has told me that Aptera's motors do get quite hot. They're in-wheel motors, and for extended operation, cooling is required. Aptera's engineering team presumably thought they could get away without cooling for this short film shoot, but they rolled the dice and it didn't play off. The car ended up restricting its power. Chris informed us that future media drives will wait until the cooling system is completed, and since that's a novel system, I don't know how long it's going to take before that is finished. What I've just paraphrased for you is backed up by a statement made the day after the Aptera video aired on NBC Nightly News, and I have no reason to believe anything anyone is telling me is anything other than the truth. So should Aptera have let NBC drive it with no cooling system? Probably not. But as a startup trying to be smart with money, the chance to be on national news really might have seemed too good to pass on. Personally, I think Aptera took a risky gamble that did not pay off. But it certainly won't be the first or last time a company has taken a gamble on demonstrating something that's not quite ready for prime time. Right, Steve?
Stop it here for a minute. No, guess it doesn't stop. Hopefully it won't start again. It did.
I also think that it'd be wrong to not note that NBC Nightly News' coverage of Aptera and solar cars, which is the whole point of the segment, wasn't that accurate from an automotive press point of view. In discussing Aptera and its place in the market, we were shown footage of both the Lightyear Zero and the Sonos Xeon. The Lightyear Zero is no longer in production, and Lightyear is, to all intents and purposes, going through restructuring after declaring bankruptcy to try and bring a more affordable solar electric car to market. Sono Motors, meanwhile, is no longer planning to bring the Xeon to market and pivoted its business to selling solar electric vehicle components to other automakers some time ago. And yet they're both featured in this reasonably recent news piece. Nowhere in that piece does it mention either that the Aptera being driven is a prototype, and when discussing other issues, nowhere does the news piece say, this is a prototype. And every time I've dealt with Aptera, or their employees have used the word Aptera followed by the vehicle's designation. So I personally find it kind of hard to believe NBC wasn't told this was a prototype. Of course, we, as a YouTube channel, can just keep talking until we're done, but linear TV has to keep things short, and NBC is large enough that the editing team that worked on the story may have not been the team that were there shooting it. And look, let's be honest, editorial bias is a thing. However hard we and other journalists try not to let it control us, it does exist. So the next time you hear about a startup having a bad day, look to see if that startup has actually engaged with the issue, owned it, and has said what it's going to do to work on fixing it. Or see if they're just interested in pointing fingers and blaming someone else. That really should tell you a lot about how the company is run, how good the product is, and most importantly, how the company's executive team feels about their product. And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you have comments, drop us a polite note below. You can reach out to us in the Discord chat room. You can reach out to us on Mastodon, or if you're a Patreon supporter, you can reach out to us there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin and Swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server, and now our new PeerTube server, if you're not already watching us on PeerTube, that is. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing Charged Up supporters, and shout-outs go out to our V2G Patreon supporters. They are Alan Topper, Andrew Martin, Bennett Elder, Brophy Wolf, Chris Maxwell, Cyprian Laplace, Dan Blair, Gordon C, Hey Esker, John Tramal, Kyle Fox, Mark Eggleton, Peter Dillinger, Ray Jean Fellows, Sean Tucker, Stefan Fremden, Stephen Williams, Tazza in the Gong, Paul Bricknell, Tony Moss, Carl Hodgson, Chris Centaur, Denny Hyde, Lance Schall, Linda Irish, Mike Weeder and Paul Nelson. And finally, big thanks to our off-grid supporters, Paul Conway, Kevin Boroughbridge, Stephen O'Donoghue, Jim Burness, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Ellery Hensley, Rory Litwin, JP Fagerback, Dave Kitchen, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, Chris and Michael Johnson, CPU Freak 101, Eric Neck, Joe Bresney, John Henderson, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Nigel S, Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and of course, Ian. Don't forget that we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday on this channel. Plus on a Sunday, you'll find myself or Kate Warren Elliott over on Transport Evolved Take 2. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you soon, and as always, keep evolving. Today we are back to Mac laptops in our classic Mac segment. Behind me is a PowerBook 3.1, aka the Pismo. It's a G3 powered PowerBook, and it's one of my favourite portable Macs. It really was a true powerhouse. This one came from my friend Adam in the UK. It originally belonged to his dad passed it to him, and he passed it to me. And it still has 2 batteries in it. I believe one of them still holds a charge, although the PRAM battery had died on this one and it had forgotten the date. According to the laptop, it's 1969 right now, and don't you dare tell it anything different. That caused some issues when I tried to connect it to the local network because it thought that various certificates had expired before they'd even taken place. Yeah, sometimes computers aren't very smart.